So the other day I was just scrolling on Instagram and I saw this amazing jumper, and I couldn't think of anything more that I wanted to do than recreate it. So I tried to recreate it. This is what it looked like, and I'm going to show you how I did this. And obviously I will link this Instagram below. I thought it was honestly the coolest thing I've ever seen, and her work is so cool. I saw so many other pieces that she'd made that are honestly, I've never seen anything like them. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and this is how I made this jumper. And I used this double knit pink colored yarn, and I used around 2.5 balls of this, and each one was 100 grams. And I also used a 6mm crochet hook. I began by making a slip knot as usual and inserted my hook into that loop. And I began making a chain, and this was the front panel of my jumper. So I basically just measured the width of the front panel of one of my favorite jumpers, and so for me that was 22 inches. So I made the chain 22 inches long. So once I had made my chain 22 inches long, that was me finished the first row of the front panel. So to help you visualize it better, it was this measurement of the jumper that the chain was. So to start the second row, I just obviously chained one as usual, and then I just began doing double crochets into every stitch of the first row. And if you don't know how to double crochet, all you do is yarn over your hook and then insert your hook into a stitch, and then yarn over, pull up a loop, and then yarn over, pull through the first 2 loops, and then yarn over and pull through the second 2 loops. And for the third row, it's exactly the same, just chaining one and then turning your work and doing a double crochet into every single stitch of the second row. So again, when I got to the end of this row, I did exactly the same as before, just chaining one and turning my work and then doing a double crochet into each stitch of the previous row. And I just continued to do this pattern until my whole front panel was 14 inches long. So once the front panel was 14 inches long, I then cut the yarn and pulled through a knot. And essentially the length of this panel should be this part of the jumper, and what I did was I measured a jumper I liked from the bottom to where the armpits start, and that for me was 14 inches. I then just cut a piece of yarn that was about 15 inches long, and then I thread it through a darning needle, and I repeated the exact same process of making the front panel for the back panel, so basically doing exactly the same thing. So I had two panels that were the same size. They look kind of like different sizes here, but they were the exact same size if you measured them out. And then I just began sewing them together just at the sides. And obviously once I'd sewed one side, I then sewed the other side, and once I'd finished sewing each side, I obviously cut the yarn and pulled a knot through. And once I'd done that, that was the body part finished. And I began the sleeves. So I first of all made a slip knot and inserted my crochet hook into that loop again. And I made a chain that was 9 inches long, and that was the length that would wrap around my wrist. So I basically just, took a measuring tape and measured around my wrist, and I obviously left a little bit of leeway, so I made it a little bit larger than the circumference of my wrist. But you can take a measurement from a jumper you like, from the wrist part, but yeah, it just depends what size works best for you. So once the chain was 9 inches long, I then inserted my hook into the very first stitch of the chain. And then I did a single crochet into that first stitch of the chain, like so. And this gave me this chain circle, as you can see. And then I did a double crochet into every single stitch the whole way around this chain circle. And once I'd done a double crochet stitch into every single stitch of the circle chain, I then just began doing a double crochet into every single stitch of the second row. And I just continued to do a double crochet into every stitch until the sleeve was 4 inches long. And obviously you can use a stitch marker to kind of mark the beginning of each new row, but for me I just used the loose thread that you can see at the bottom, and I just referenced that the stitch vertically above the loose thread would be the first stitch of the new row. But it doesn't really matter, because as long as the sleeve is the right length, it should be fine. So when the sleeve was 4 inches long, I then made an increase, and this was obviously to ensure that the sleeve was wide enough for my arm to go through it. And the 4 inches is halfway up to my elbow, so take it as you will for your sizing. And to do an increase, all I did was chain 1, and then I did a double crochet into the next stitch, and then I did a double crochet into the same stitch that I had just done a double crochet into, so essentially doing 2 double crochets into 1 stitch. And then I just continued to do a double crochet into every single stitch of the row. And so I just did every other row without a increase, and I just kept on doing that until the sleeve measured 5.5 inches in length. So when the length was 5.5 inches, I then made another increase. And I made the increase in the stitch directly vertical to the stitch with the loose thread. And again, to make the increase, I just chained 1, and then I did 2 double crochets into the next stitch. So this is 1 double crochet, and 2. And the 5.5 inches that I measured to make an increase for it was because I measured the circumference of my wrist, and it got a little wider when it got to the 5.5 inches mark. And so for the rest of the row, I then just did only 1 double crochet into all the rest of the stitches. And then I just continued to do double crochets into every row until the sleeve measured 6.5 inches in length. And again, that's because I measured the circumference of my lower arm, and it got larger when it got to the 6.5 inch mark of length. And when I got to that mark, I then just did an increase, so doing chain 1 and then doing 2 double crochets into the next stitch. And then I just did only 1 double crochet into every other stitch of the row, and for every row until the arm length measured 7.5 inches. So when the arm length measured 7.5 inches long, I then just did another increase, so by chaining and then doing 2 double crochets into the next stitch. And I basically just continued this whole pattern of, just doing 1 double crochet into every stitch for every row until I got to a length of the sleeve that I wanted to increase the width of. So basically, when there was an increase of the circumference of my arm, I then did a increase in stitches, so by chaining 1 and then doing 2 double crochets into 1 stitch. And by increasing the number of stitches, you then increase the width of the sleeve. So the remaining length measurements that I did an increase in was I did one in 9 inches, and then one at 9.5 inches, and then another one at 13.5 inches, and that was all the increases that I did. And then once the sleeve measured 22 inches in length, I was finished. And I'm probably around a size small, so it's probably on the smaller size of a length. So as I said before, when the sleeve was 22 inches long, I then cut the yarn and pulled through a knot, and the length 22 inches is basically the length from my wrist to my armpit. And so once I'd finished the first sleeve, I obviously made an identical other one, and I just began attaching it to the main body. So to do this, I measured the width of my armpit, which was 5 inches, and then I just measured 5 inches on the sleeve and the main body, and then I put a bobby pin, or you can use a stitch marker, in each of those stitches that was 5 inches apart. So as you can see here, it's just the top stitches, obviously, basically ones that were 5 inches apart. And as you can see, the side seam from sewing the main body parts together is in the middle of where I am crocheting together. So I began with making a slip knot with my yarn and inserting my crochet hook. And then I just inserted my hook into the 2 stitches with the bobby pin, and then I just began single crocheting the sleeve to the main body. So basically just inserting my hook into both of the stitches on the sleeve and the main body, and then just single crocheting. And then just continue to single crochet the stitches together until I got to the other stitch with the bobby pin in it. And then I just took the bobby pins out. And then I chained 1, and then I did a double crochet into all the stitches of the sleeve, because now I was basically building the shoulder part of the sleeves. Yeah, so basically, as I said before, I did a double crochet stitch into every stitch until I got to the other side of the sleeve. So when I got to the other side of the sleeve, I then inserted my hook into that stitch that I had just double crocheted into, and then I inserted my hook into the next stitch of the main body part that I hadn't stitched into, and then I just did a single crochet, and then I turned my work and chained 2, and then I just began doing a double crochet into every stitch of that row of the sleeve. And when I got to the end of the row, I then inserted my hook into the stitch I had just double crocheted into, and then inserted my hook into the next available stitch of the body part, and then I just did a single crochet, turned my work, and then I chained 2, and then I just continued to do double crochets into every single stitch of this row to build the shoulder part of the sleeve. And I did the exact same thing for every row. For building the shoulder part of the sleeve, I just, double crocheted into every single stitch of the row, and when I got to the end of the row, I inserted my hook into the last stitch I had double crocheted into, and then inserted my hook into the next available stitch of the body part, and then single crocheted, and then chain 2, and then turn my work, and then continue to do a double crochet into every stitch of the next row. And I did this until the whole sleeve in total measured 30 inches in total, so I did 8 inches basically of the shoulder part. So when I'd finished those 8 inches of the shoulder part, I then turned my work and I inserted my hook into the last stitch I had stitched into, and then I again inserted my hook into the next available stitch of the body part, and I did a single crochet, so just like usual, but I did it on the way back. And then for every single stitch for the last row, I did a slip stitch into it, just to make the sleeves a more defined and puffed shoulder. And if you don't know how to do a slip stitch, all you do is insert your hook into the stitch and then yarn over, pull up a loop, and then pull through that loop that's already on your hook. And yeah, as I said before, I just did a slip stitch into every single stitch that was left for the last row. And then when I got to the last stitch to do a single crochet, I then obviously did exactly as I did before. To finish off a row, I inserted my hook into the last stitch I had stitched into, and then also inserted my hook into the next available stitch of the body part, and then I did a single crochet. And once I'd done that, I had finished the work basically. And then so I cut the yarn and pulled a knot. And I obviously did the exact same for the other sleeve on the other side of the main body. And then I just got some blue scrap yarn like so, and then I made a slip knot and I began making a chain. And I basically just made the chain that was long enough that I thought the bow would look good on the jumper, but it doesn't really matter. I don't know, I would say probably about 30 inches I made this one, but I made them all different sizes. I didn't measure all the sizes of the chains that I made to make the bow, so I'm not actually too sure the sizing. But yeah, so when I had finished the desired length of the chain, I then obviously cut the yarn and pulled a knot through. And then to make the bow, all I kind of did was as if I was tying my shoelaces. And then I cut a piece of the same colored yarn and then I threaded it through a needle like so. And then I just began placing where I thought the bow would look good on. Where about on the jumper it would look nice. So I just decided to put it here. And then I just began sewing it onto the jumper. And to do this, I just used like a basic straight stitch. So just like pulling the needle through the jumper and then through the front and then through the back, as you can kind of see. And I did a stitch into every single stitch of the chain until I basically just sewed the bow onto the jumper. And once I'd completed the blue bow, I then just got this kind of reddy orange colored yarn, and then I made a slip knot as usual and then inserted my hook into the loop, and then I just began making a chain that was a little bit longer than the last one because I wanted to be a bit bigger. So when the chain was the size I wanted it to be, I then cut the yarn and pulled through a knot as usual. And for this bow, I decided to get some cream colored yarn and then also make a slip knot and insert my hook. And then I just began doing single crochets into every stitch of this ready orange colored yarn chain, because I just thought it would look cool for like a 2-color contrast bow. But yeah. So once I'd done a single crochet into every single stitch of the chain, I then just cut the yarn and tied a knot. I then, as the same as before, cut a piece of that cream colored yarn and then thread it through a needle. And then I just got the jumper, and then I made a bow with this single crocheted chain, like so. And then I just placed it, or I thought it would look nice on the jumper, the same as the blue one. And then I began sewing this bow onto the jumper as well, like so. And then I just turned my work, and then I did this kind of turquoisey green color bow, and then I began sewing that onto it as well. And then I made another chain with that same colored blue yarn from the start, and then I just made a bow as well, and then I just placed it on the sleeve kind of area of the jumper, and then I just began sewing it. And then I turned my work, and I'd made this chain with a purple and pink colored yarn, and then I also made a bow, and then I just placed it again on the sleeve kind of area, but like dropping down to the main body. And then I just began sewing this bow onto the jumper as well. And once I finished, I just then did all the ends. And I know The original was a knit jumper, but I think this one turned out alright. And this was the jumper finished, and thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.